Cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, these are all addictions that we're used to talking about. Many of us have experienced these things either firsthand or through friends and family. Something that is rarely discussed is the idea of sex addiction. What does it mean to be a sex addict? How do we separate normal sexual interest and deviant sexual addiction? Tonight I have the pleasure of talking to Tiffany Jones, registered sex therapist. She's the head of the Denver Sexology Center and has been working as a sex coach for the last 10 years. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi. So let's just start by talking about what is addiction. If we're talking about sexual addiction, what does that mean? How can somebody be a sexual addict?
That's where I think the problem kind of originates, is looking at what is a sex addict versus what is not a sex addict. Can we start with what sex addiction is not?
Sure.
Sex addiction is not people that experience healthy sexual relationships, even if it, includes a number of people in a given day. It's going to be varied from person to person.
And that comes back to the idea of, well, what is healthy then? A lot of people will ask, well, am I normal? Is my behavior normal? So how can we tell if that's healthy behavior versus unhealthy behavior?
I think if the behaviors are getting in the way of a person's life in terms of their family, their relationships, their job, that's when it becomes a problem. If you can still maintain healthy relationships and family and work and home and still have 10 sex partners in a day, I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing.
Do you find that happens very often, that people have multiple sex partners during a day and not have any underlying problems?
I do see that. I mean, people have really high sex drives and want to express and kind of act out on those fantasies without kind of holding them in. A lot of people hold in their fantasies where other people are more comfortable with actually going out in the day and acting out on those things and still being able to maintain everything at home.
Sure. So how can I tell if my behavior is more abnormal? Is it a matter of comfort? Is it a matter of maybe my life is okay and I'm going to my job, but every night when I go home, all I do is look at pornography on the internet. Is that a problem?
I think if you see it as a problem, it takes, I think, first the individual to look at their own self and their motivations for their behaviors. Are you doing this because it's something you enjoy, or are you doing it to avoid dealing with other problems that you might have? What's motivating you to act in, or to engage in viewing pornographic material or whatnot? If it's not getting in the way of your life, again, I don't see that it's necessarily a problem. If it's trying to mask something else, then that's why you have to kind of look at the addiction side.
What would you say are the primary motivations of a lot of sex addicts, maybe, that you've worked with?
Well, I think that the motivation is something that is an individual is experiencing internal problems and has underlying other sometimes psychiatric problems or depression or self-esteem issues, and they're acting out to try to either create some type of intimacy that's not there, or to avoid intimacy that they could be having if they had a consistent person in their life. So,
and that seems to be a big thing, that idea of intimacy. Is it running away from intimacy, or is it trying to find intimacy?
I think it would vary from person to person. Sex addiction as a term is just so broad. And then when you look at individuals and their sexual behaviors, they differ so much from person to person. So I think it's going to just vary depending on the person who's experiencing these thoughts and feelings.
And it seems like the gay community has really gotten this label of sex addiction more than, I would say, the heterosexual community. I mean, that may be biased. Do you think it has something to do with homosexuality already being seen as deviant, so any other label, well, that would just go along with the first deviant behavior? What would you think about that?
I think that there is some type of connection with the gay and lesbian population already being seen as kind of going outside the norms of what's acceptable sexually. Even though that is changing, there still is, society attaches some negative connotations to those behaviors. So it's easy to kind of throw multiple labels at people. In this day and age, people have all sorts of illnesses combined into one. So it just kind of, it's medicalizing these sexual behaviors that I don't, in an error, in an erroneous way. I don't think it's necessary.
And it seems like we've always had that problem of other people telling us what sexuality is normal, not only in the gay community, but in the heterosexual community too. It's just as varied. Whether you're into bondage or anything like that, getting that label of deviancy, of addiction. What do you think about that?
I think that it's a reflection of what's going on historically and socially for us, and we have to see how things have kind of evolved over time. Labels have come in and out of usage as far as what's a disorder versus what's just, someone's choice. Homosexuality is something that has been termed in the past as being an illness, where now it is not seen as bad. So just seeing how labels change, I think, and recognizing that's important.
So our idea of what is a sexual addict has changed throughout time.
I even think of the term nymphomaniac and how that's changed over time. I mean, that's kind of more geared towards a female, almost sex addict. What's the difference between a sex addict and a nymphomaniac or a hypersexual person? I mean, there's fine lines between all of those, but they're still all, terms that were created by people, so it's not going to always fit people.
And we often think of nymphomaniac as being a very female kind of thing, that only women can be nymphomaniacs, because men enjoying sex isn't a disorder, isn't a problem. So is there a gender context that also goes along with who's going to be labeled a sex addict and who's not?
It seems to be, because society puts these labels out there, and they tend to kind of point their finger at certain populations, it seems like, during certain time frames. So, the gay lesbian population has been targeted as being already deviant. So it's again just kind of putting those terms all together on people that may be in error.
Sure. Do you think that gay males are labeled sex addicts more than lesbians, or have behavior that may get them labeled more as sex addicts?
From my experience and what I've learned through talking with people, it does seem like men are more apt to be kind of categorized as sex addicts, specifically in the gay population. And again, that might be more of a social influence, that we think they're already experiencing kind of deviations from social norms, so they must be doing it in abundance, or they must be very, highly sexed or something like this. So there's a connection just in the way we kind of view homosexuality, I think. Sure.
And when we see couples who are embracing things like multiple partners, and we see that as even more deviant. Now, not only are you gay, but now you're in multiple partners, you must be a crazed sex maniac. So how do you deal with clients dealing with all of these negative messages?
I think just working with an individual to get them comfortable to experience their own sexuality, whatever that may be, as long as they keep, the key would be to be safe and to protect themselves and others, and to make decisions coming from a healthy place, not to use sex as a coping mechanism for other problems that might be happening.
Sex for sex health. For the sake of sex.
Right, exactly.
And you said safety is a big part. What do you think about people who will seek out things like bareback parties, where they're having unprotected sex with multiple partners? Is that part of sex addiction, or is that completely separate? I think there's a connection there, and red flags kind of go off when there's that kind of activity that brings so much risk into the play, because
you have to question the motivation of people participating. Are they doing this as an expression of freedom and to experience their own desires, or are they acting out of other issues that they might be having, fears that they may be having, self-esteem issues, or other negative motivations?
So in your opinion, the same behavior could be a problem and it could not be a problem?
Absolutely.
It just depends on the motivation behind it, why the person's doing this.
Exactly.
What do you think about other risky type behaviors? Would they play a part in sexual addiction, like asphyxiation during sex or bondage? Is that part of sex addiction as well, or is that separate?
I think all of these things can be connected or not. I mean, it's going to be on an individual basis. Addicted to the fear of maybe death or something like that. If it goes that far, then I mean, addiction could play a role. But if it's just someone who wants to experience these things, even though it's risky behavior, it's not risky in the same sense that a bareback party would be, because you're dealing with hopefully educated people who know how to do what it is they're doing.
So again, if my life revolves around it, or I have no life because I'm involved in this, that's when it's becoming a problem.
Or you're just the safety issue. I talk more, when I talk about safety, I'm talking more about safe sex with any partner that you're having. Of course, you're talking about asphyxiation. That's a different safety issue. That's more about knowledge in terms of techniques that you're using or whatnot.
So I get the idea in pop culture that any aberrant sex leads to sex addiction, or is a part of it. But you're really saying they're completely separate things, or they can be very very separate.
I think they really can be separate, but not always. There is connections between some of these other disorders and sex addiction, and we know just from general public knows about addiction problems that they can transfer a sex addiction to an alcohol addiction, or that addiction is really the underlying problem. Then is it sex, or is it food, or looking at addiction as its own component is really important then too, to see what is how can this person deal with their addictive behaviors.
So what hole am I trying to fill with any of these things, whether it's alcohol or sex or chocolate?
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, that's what you need to find out ultimately.
Right. Let's say I was concerned about my sexual behavior, and I was, maybe some people have told me, maybe you're too involved in sexuality, maybe you think about it too much. How would I know, or at what point would I seek out help, or should I seek out help?
As soon as you start to feel some uncomfortableness about your sexual behavior and you start to question it, I think that would be a good time to do some research on your own, go online, find out what is the definition of sex addiction. There are some tests you can do online to determine if you fall into categories, or meet with a therapist, and ultimately do some soul searching for yourself to see if your behaviors are really self-destructive, or if you're just a sexual person. It's okay to be the sexual person without having to be an addictive person.
And I think that's something that in the gay community we've had to do before. Just the coming out process is looking at my sexual urges, and are they normal, and is this right for me, or is this deviant behavior? So that would be a very similar journey, it sounds like. Yeah,
and I think that for that reason the gay and lesbian population would have an advantage, because they already have gone through some of this internal soul searching that maybe a straight population would not have the advantage of. So they have some heads up there as far as
some tools already.
Yeah, exactly.
But we may have that same, on the other side, may already be questioning our sexuality, and may already have those insecurities about sexuality, where we may jump to conclusions like I'm a sex addict much quicker than maybe the heterosexual counterpart.
And that could be definitely the downside, because of that. Already those experiences that maybe other people haven't had could get you to kind of question everything about your sexuality, which could have good and bad sides.
Sure. So let's say I came to you as my therapist to kind of work through some of these issues. Very briefly, what would you do with somebody who was looking at this as a problem?
Initially do a full sex history on them, looking at just the way things have evolved for them sexually from an early age on, and to have them kind of journal and do some note-taking as to when they're having thoughts or behaviors and actions that are related to what might be a sex addiction, to have a journal for themselves. How much is it actually happening? Maybe it's not as much as they think, and maybe it's not as destructive as they think. Maybe they're just concerned because it seems like a lot. You know.
Or other people are telling them it's too
right.
much.
Or they feel,
maybe even their own partner is telling them it's too much.
Right, which, you know, that's another fact of, or important thing to look at with sex addiction is partners. You know, is it a partner thing? Maybe there's mixed match libidos there. Maybe someone has a higher sex drive. That doesn't necessarily make a sex addict, you know?
Thank God. So what would you suggest to anybody who's really struggling with this idea, any of our viewers?
To first do some internal kind of soul searching and seeing if, in fact, you think that this is a problem for you. If it's getting in the way of your relationships, you feel like you can't function at the level that you had in the past, or you still see kind of a deteriorating state of yourself and self-esteem, and just to try to work on what is it that this addiction is feeling. You know, if
what
it
are
isn't,
those motivations?
Exactly. If
sure.
the motivation isn't healthy and it's not an empowering for you, it's a destructive factor. So what can be done to figure out what it is that that person is missing or lacking that kind of causes some of these responses with addiction?
Because overall, sex is good.
Sex is great.
Sex is great. All right. Well, thank you so much. I hate to, well, actually, I'd love to leave it there on sex is good. I think that's great. Well, I'm sure there's much more we could discuss about this topic, but we'll have to leave it there. I want to thank my guest, Tiffany Jones, for being with us and helping us explore this provocative issue. I'm Fawn Oats for Colorado Outspoken.